Something big, though, that sadly has been just completely thrown under the rug or not getting the attention it deserves is being overlooked, thank you, because of this impeachment inquiry, is the White House rolling or sweeping out new rules that require transparency for hospitals and insurers. And that's a very big thing because what I see this as is now whenever you go to the hospital or something along those lines, instead of you getting a surprise medical bill, you're going to know up front what the price of that's going to be. As long as, so that's as far as I know. But joining us on 710 KURV is James Bell, who's an attorney who practices these types of things. James, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it. Now, okay, tell us more about what you know when it comes to this new White House transparency rule.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think the goal is to give patients knowledge about what the real price is so that there's no quote unquote, complete transparency with respect to, which vendors are charging what the upcharges are, and why hospitals, turn around and charge $67 for an aspirin when they got it for 10 cents because they know that the insurance company is only going to pay, X amount of cents on the dollar, whereas folks that don't have insurance end up paying these marked up rates. So
are you there?
Yeah, the drug companies got to him.
No. Well, as an attorney, I wanted to ask you, James, would there be a case here if, let's say, a hospital organization decides to sue the Trump administration because of this new transparency rule, saying that, no, you can't do that, whatever the case is? What would be a case?
Yeah, I think it's possible that some drug companies could file a case against the government and HHS, Health and Human Services, and declare that this rule is unconstitutional and or exceeds the bounds of the Commerce Clause, or it's interfering with states' rights, its ability to deal with its own business practices. Yeah. So sure, do I think? I mean, the threshold question is going to be whether or not this group is going to have what they call standing.
Yeah, this is Davis Rankin. Is it possible for the federal government? I don't know if there's any hospitals that don't take money, which starts in the U.S. Treasury, but wouldn't they say if you're going to accept government payments, like for Medicare or Medicaid, you must post the cost of your services, because they can tell you now if you practice racial discrimination, for example, you're not going to get our money. Why wouldn't that get traction in court?
I think that would get traction in court. On the other hand, as you know, there's a lot of hospitals that are quote unquote out of network and that don't take federal funds, and in those instances, the question becomes, whether or not the government's, the proposed new law that goes into effect, whether or not it would cause injury to these out-of-network hospitals and force them to engage in practices that they otherwise wouldn't have to adopt but for this new rule. And I think the answer would be, to the extent that it's kind of like a highway. The U.S. government can threaten to pull funding on a highway through a state if the local government doesn't do A, B, or C. And if they don't, then there's no funding. If they do, they get the funding and they get the highway. Here in this circumstance, the hospital that's taking Medicare, TRICARE, DOL, Medicare, all the different federal funded programs, that I think obviously they're going to have to comply and comport with the new rule and be susceptible to these regulations. On the other hand, if the hospital's at a network and it doesn't take federal funding, then perhaps there would be the best argument for a hospital to try and invalidate or render this, try and make a constitutional attack on this new rule.
My belief, based on my belief, not only kind of fact, is that all hospitals, when you say in network or out of network, it means they have not reached an agreement with, let's say, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Texas to do business in a certain fashion, to charge X or Y or Z or to reimburse however they do it. I guess not all hospitals are in all the networks, but they got to be in somebody's network, or they're all cash payments from people. No, I mean, in other words, they're all going to be covered by this.
Well, I think the answer is a little bit more. I think out of network just really means that there's no deal with the hospital. The hospital can choose whether or not it accepts federal funds, whether or not it wants to take Medicare, whether or not it wants to take DOL, whether or not it takes TRICARE. I mean, I think we can all agree on that, right? The hospital's billing system, what insurances or what payors, whether it's a government payor versus a commercial payor, is up to the hospital. Then the next question is, if it's out of network, I don't think it necessarily means that it comes out of pocket. If let's say you have Blue Cross Blue Shield insurance and this one hospital doesn't have a deal with BCBS, and so you go to them and you really want this surgeon that practices at this one particular hospital. Yeah. Well, BCBS is going to have out of network benefits. It'll pay 60% of cover 60% of it. And the question is whether or not the hospital, which it's supposed to, is the hospital goes after, tries to track the patient for the copay, is really, I think, the question that you're getting to, whether or not the consumer, the patient, is on the hook for the copay. And the answer is yes, but a lot of the time the rates for out-of-network hospital fees are so exorbitant and paid at such a higher rate than that which would be if they were in network, that oftentimes, rightly or wrongly, these hospitals don't go after the patient for the deductible. And that's been a long source of contention within, the healthcare framework.
Joining us on 710 KURV is James Bell, an attorney, and we're talking about how the White House rolls out sweeping transparency rules for hospitals and insurers.
Now, this is, I think this, I'll use my wife as an example of what I think we're talking about. She had to have a breast biopsy, so at the time she had $1 million cap on her coverage. So she asked the surgeon who's going to do the biopsy, a friend of ours, well, what's this going to cost? And she asked, I think, the nurse or someone. She had to get the chief of staff to figure this out, a friend of ours, because unlike going into a bakery and it's $2.95 for a cookie, they didn't know, or they said they didn't know. Now, I happen to believe, without any reason to believe, that the top dogs in hospitals know what the cost of delivering a service is. I believe that they know that.
Are they, sorry for interrupting, but are they the ones that set what that price is? Who determines what a price of anything medically is?
Back to the lawyer.
Well, yeah, who determines what the price of that biopsy is, or an MRI is, or a surgery? Who determines that?
Mr. Lawyer?
Well, I think that's part of the purpose of this new rule. At the end of the day, the hospital is the one that's setting the prices, and it's on some based on some arithmetic and algorithm predicated on what is the insurance paying versus what do they get in grants and taxes, et cetera, et cetera. And so versus how long the claims are paid out. That's really what determines and the lack of payment from patients that don't have insurance is another factor that goes into. Obviously, the hospital's trying to make up for patients that don't have insurance or have very minimal insurance. That's why they'll charge $67 for an aspirin, and the person that's paying cash going, the insurance is only reimbursing you $1 for the aspirin, but you're charging me $67. How is that equitable? And of course, it's not.
Have you seen much chatter in legal circles or legal journals about this? I can hear you trying to puzzle this out where you think it's going to go, but is there any smarter people than we are at the law schools who got this all figured out?
I don't think anybody has it figured out, other than what it is on the surface. The four corners means there's more transparency, which may at the end of the day lead. I think the real question is, what is the harm? What's the harm that comes about by this new policy?
Financial harm to the hospitals.
But if people are going to go to the hospitals anyway. Is anybody going to go to a hospital that needs a surgery and say, you know what, now they know the price, it's too expensive, I'm not going to get the operation I need?
Well, they might,
But they can do that already. I just think it's good to know what the price is so that way you're not surprised with this bill when it comes to your mail or your house. And then you can start mentally preparing as to how you're going to pay for it.
Last question. Is this thing aimed at the insurance companies or the hospitals, do you think?
It applies to
both.
Both. It appears.
All right, James.
Well, we're going to put your name in the Rolodex.
Yep, we're going to call you again soon.
Right.
So,
but not after midnight.
Look out for my text. James, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it. That is James Bell, an attorney, our guest on 710 KURV.